Good morning. My name is Jamie Sullivan, and I'm the manager for the National Center for Rural Road Safety. Welcome to our first August webinar entitled Local Funding Safety Options. We're going to get started now. Close out these polls and let you know who's joining us today. It looks like we have about 38% of you joining us from the Southeast, 31% from the Midwest, about 24% from the West, and only about 3% of you so far from the Northeast. And I do see there are some more people trickling in, so this may change a little bit. Most of you are joining us on your computers by yourself, but as always, we do have a few of you in groups. If you are in a group, please make sure that you send all of the names and email addresses for those attendees to our email address, info@ruralsafetycenter.org. As far as organization breakdown for today goes, it looks like we have about 28% of you from local transportation departments, about 17% from state transportation departments, 14% federal. We have about 2% tribal, 10% other federal, state, or local government, and then we do have a few of you from law enforcement, EMS, and educational institutions as well. And then also about 17% from private consultants. It does look like as well that about 67% of you are joining us by computer only, and the rest of you are joining us both on the computer and phone. For those of you joining us computer only, if you do have any audio issues, we will remind you to please call in. The phone number is in the top left-hand corner of the screen in case you do have audio issues. For those of you joining us on the phone only, if you do need the link to join us today or are interested in having the handouts and are not already on the web, if you go to our website at www.ruralsafetycenter.org, look for our training drop-down and go to register for trainings. Under the local funding safety options one, we have provided the link for today's webinar as well as the PDF of the handouts where you can download that and follow along with us if you so choose. I'm going to move us over to our presentation now. And we're going to go through just a few webinar logistics for y'all. Today's webinar will last an hour and a half. It is being recorded and will be archived on our website in about a week. For quality of our recording, everyone's phone lines have been muted during the presentation other than our speakers. You will be able to use ask questions using the chat pod, which you can find over on the left-hand side. You'll notice that even when we move over to our poll breaks, that chat pod will still remain on the left-hand side. Please feel free to go ahead and put any questions in there at any time. When we stop at the end of each section for question and answers, of which there will be 4 sections today, we will read those questions out to our presenters and have them answer them. If you are listening by phone, we do want to remind you to please mute your computer, otherwise you will hear some feedback. Also on the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll find 4 arrow keys that point out. If you do want to view the presentation itself bigger, in case of graphics or charts, you can press those 4 arrow buttons and that will make the presentation larger and get rid of all of the chat pods and handouts for you. At the bottom left-hand corner, you will find our handout section. This is where you can download the PDF version of today's slides for your reference. There is also a save the date card for our upcoming summit, as well as a sponsor packet if you are interested in becoming a sponsor for the Safety Center and NACE's upcoming Safety Summit in December. Again, as I mentioned, if you are listening in a group, please make sure you do send those lists to info@ruralsafetycenter.org. That will be the only way for you to receive a survey, and the survey is the only way for you to request certificates of completion and the CEUs. The surveys are important for you to do if you wouldn't mind. The first one will come out directly following today's webinar. Because these sometimes do get stuck in junk mail, we did put the link up here for you to make sure that you are able to request those certificates and CEUs. Again, this link is found in that handout that you can download on the left-hand corner. The surveys close about 2 weeks after the webinar, so you can expect your certificates and CEU forms 3 to 4 weeks after the webinar. The CEU forms, it is free to request these CEUs, but they do need to be returned to continuing ed at montana.edu, as that is run out of a different department at Montana State University. I will show you as well on this slide, the top left-hand corner is what the registration form will look like. And then if you do want to verify that you have all of these CEUs, you may request that verification of completion from Montana State University, and they will provide you a list of all of the webinars that you have requested CEUs for. Today's webinar is co-hosted by the Federal Highway Administration and also the National Association of County Engineers, so we do want to thank them for co-hosting with us today. Today's presenters, we have 4 of them for you today, and I'm going to read off their bio information. First, we have Hillary Isebrands. Hillary has contributed to the transportation profession for over 20 years. She has expertise as a roadway design and safety engineer, as well as a traffic engineer and transportation researcher. Hillary is currently a senior roadway safety engineer and team leader with FHWA Resource Center Safety and Design Team. Hillary is a professional engineer in Iowa and Wisconsin, a National Highway Institute certified instructor, and has her BS, MS, and PhD in civil engineering. Second, we will have Scott Davis speaking for us. He is the traffic engineer and operations manager for Thurston County, Washington. He has been working at Thurston County Public Works for 22 years in various capacities, including roadway design, construction management, land use permitting, and transportation engineering. He holds a bachelor's degree from Oregon State University in civil engineering, and Scott is a registered professional engineer in the state of Washington. He also is the Safety Committee Chair for NACE and serves as several national safety-related committees with the Transportation Research Board and AASHTO. Our third speaker will be Karen Scurry. She's the Program Manager from FHWA's Office of Safety. Her primary duties involve activities to support implementation of the Highway Safety Improvement Program and promoting the use of crash modification factors in transportation decision-making process. Karen holds both a bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering from Rutgers University and is a registered professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. And last but not least, we will have Donna Buchwald with us. She is an Iowa native and a graduate of Iowa State University in construction engineering. Donna is the director of the Office of Local Systems at the Iowa Department of Transportation. Prior to her current position, Donna served as the department as the urban engineer and deputy director in local systems, assistant specifications engineer, a field systems engineer in the Office of Construction, and as a design engineer in the Office of Design. Prior to her joining the department, Donna worked in various capacities for the Des Moines Waterworks, Iowa Department of Transportation, and as a project engineer for Kmart Corporation. So we do want to thank all 4 of our speakers for taking the time today to talk to you guys about local safety funding. Once you have completed this webinar, you will have an overview of safety funding for local safety projects. It will include examples of local agency funding, state and federal funding, as well as other opportunities to invest in safety projects. To achieve this webinar goal, you will learn the following: to list local safety project types and funding sources, to summarize examples of local funding for local safety projects, to summarize examples of federal funding for local safety projects, and to summarize examples of state funding for local safety projects. And before we do move along to our first speaker, we had a poll question for you. So for our audience, what types of funds have you used on safety projects? Have you used Highway Safety Improvement Program funds, other federal funds, state funds, local road maintenance funds, local capital funds, grants, or other funds? And you can feel free to check as many of these as is applicable. If you are checking the other funds box, to the right you'll see that we do have an open text box for you to go ahead and specify what those might be to give some of the other audience members examples or ideas of where they could look for funding. We'll give everyone just another second to go ahead and fill out the poll questions. Okay, so it does look like from our audience about 67% of you use Highway Safety Improvement Program funds. About 54% of you use other federal funds. 67% use state funds. 43% of you use local road maintenance funds. About 41% use local capital funds. About 40% use grants. And about 8% of you said other funds, and some of those other funds were cost sharing with businesses, private sponsorships, CMAQ funds, Tribal Transportation Safety Funds, and NHTSA funding. So thank you all for that information. And at this time, I am going to turn the presentation over to Hillary. Hillary?
Thank you, Jamie, and welcome everyone today, this morning. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly short so we've got enough time to hear the other speakers, but I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to understand where the idea came from to host this webinar today. And really, there has been other funding webinars that have been held by various entities, including Federal Highway Administration. But recently, Federal Highway Administration and the National Association of County Engineers, along with the National LTAP Association, that's the Local Technical Assistance Program, embarked on a pilot here in early 2018 where we had an effort to deploy local road safety plans. And this particular effort, again, was a pilot. 6 states were involved in the pilot. It's California, Nevada, Colorado, Wisconsin, Ohio, and Florida. And within those 6 states, we had 24 counties that participated in a local road safety plan training as well as development of local road safety plans. And throughout that process, we really realized that we needed probably a better idea of what all the funding sources might potentially be to not only maybe develop a local road safety plan, but also to implement a local road safety plan and safety projects on the local road system. So we've got some great input today from our speakers, from Scott, from Karen, and from Donna, just to give us an idea of what's going on out there related to funding local road safety plans and projects. So just so you have, there's a link there on the bottom if you're interested in grabbing that link. That link is to a local road safety plan video that was produced as a part of this process through Everyday Counts, data-driven safety analysis, as well as this pilot. And one of the things I'm also going to share with you is a quote that we used throughout the pilot that really to help us, what can you do as an individual? What can you do as maybe a team or an agency from the local level? And that is do what you can with what you have where you are. We know that it can be daunting. Everyone has a lot of things on their plate. But the question that we really should reflect on is what can I do or what can my team do related to advancing local road safety? So we really took that to heart as we went through this pilot program. Again, the goals of the pilot were really to progress towards National Association of County Engineer and Federal Highway goals of reducing fatal and injury crashes on all public roads. We were looking to advance data-driven and systemic approach to improving safety on local roads, complement current efforts related to development of local road safety plans and implementation of local road safety plans and projects that may have been prioritized in those plans. And then also just accelerate that development and implementation of local road safety plans. You might be aware that every state DOT does have a strategic highway safety plan, and that does kind of provides a roadmap for the issues that they have, the priorities that each of the states have, and then also ultimately how they may be spending their funding towards addressing those issues and ultimate goals. Well, the idea, again, with local road safety plans is taking that down another layer at the local level and looking at how a local road safety plan can help guide a local agency to safer roads. Now, we do have several states out there that do have a local road safety plan in every single county. namely, I think it's North Dakota, Minnesota, and Washington State is pretty close itself in terms of being 100% in terms of the number of counties. We also have other counties across the country and other local agencies that have taken this on. And again, the effort here was to get more states and more local agencies engaged in the development of local road safety plans to address their safety issues. Some of the highlights of this local road safety plan pilot it was a blended learning. There was a webinar series that occurred between January and May. There was ongoing technical assistance at all times with data analysis, actually just getting data in the first place, as well as an in-person workshop that was a part of that as well. Each of the counties, those 24 counties, did their commitment was doing homework, collecting data, analyzing the data, looking at the data, working with their stakeholders, trying to identify solutions that might be appropriate for the issues that they were having. And then, of course, ultimately some plan development. So we do have numerous counties that were a part of that pilot program that do have local road safety plans in hand now, and the rest of them are working towards getting those local road safety plans completed. And this was a team effort. It takes a village. We had the state DOTs, the Federal Highways Division offices, the National Association of County Engineers affiliate. I mentioned the LCAP and Federal Highways role in this as well. But we all know it takes all of us to achieve a lot of the goals that we have, and that certainly was part of this process. So some of the takeaways from the pilot were, data, getting access to data and how important it is to get access to data, and also having usable data, and knowing what to do with it. And that's not just crash data. It's also knowing your risks. It's knowing perhaps where you've got traffic violations, so working with your law enforcement. It's looking at your maintenance logs and where you might, again, have some risks out there, guardrail hit, signs knocked down, skid marks on curbs, things of that nature, to help really guide you, again, in terms of where your risks are and how you can not only prioritize projects, but prioritize ultimately your funding when it comes to addressing local road safety. Time. We all wish, I think, sometimes we had more time. I know I do, but it's finding the time. And I think Marie Walsh from the Louisiana LTAP Center put it best when she said, set aside an hour or two a week of your schedule to dedicate to local road safety. And that was really a challenge that she gave all of us in terms of looking forward and trying to achieve our goals. And then last but not least, and where that brings us today, is the funding piece. Not only streamlining the federal funding process for local road safety projects, but looking to other areas within your own organization as to where you might identify funding, whether that's how you're spending your maintenance dollars or how you're spending your capital improvement dollars, and really taking an internal look at how, as an agency, you're spending your funds on local roads. And again, I will mention that in terms of addressing the fatal and injury crashes as a whole across the nation, we know that it does vary from state to state, but anywhere from 40 to 60% of the fatalities that occur in this country do occur on locally maintained roads. So we really do have a challenge in front of us, but together we really do feel like we can work towards driving those numbers down and making the roads safe at all levels, the roads that we drive on a daily basis, on a regular basis, those roads in our communities. So again, we have some great speakers here today with Scott and Karen and Donna to share a little bit more about what they're doing to help support in making sure that we have ideas for how to invest in local road safety. So with that, Jamie, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Hillary. And for those of you who do have questions for Hillary at this time, if you want to put them in the chat pod over on the left-hand side, we do not have a poll question for you at this break. But Hillary, we do already have a question for you. And that is, was there a consultant that prepared the local road safety plans, or are the counties developing them on their own in the pilot project?
All right. Thanks, Devin, for that question. I did not cover that. So really the effort with the pilot program was for it to be really a do-it-yourself. So we were working with, Federal Highways, National Association of County Engineers, and the LCAPs we're really working directly with the counties and the state DOTs for them to develop their own plan. We had a champion, at least one champion in every single one of those 24 counties where they were participating throughout the entire pilot program that went from January to May, and they were writing their own plans. We had a template available for them to be working off of a template. We used a lot of example plans that are out there, but the goal was for it to actually be done in-house with that support from the team for them to ultimately get a plan. Now, I will mention we did have a contractor on board through Federal Highways that did help with some of the data analysis. I would say about 8 to 9 of the 24 counties utilized the consultants to help with some of the data analysis. Again, we had a template that we were using that we borrowed from Washington State, but the intent really was that the counties take that ownership of development of the plan and ultimately look at how they were able to implement it. Thank you for that question, Devin.
Thank you very much, Hillary. And to follow along on that and talk more about the Local Road Safety Plan program and how the safety projects are funded in Washington, here is Scott Davis.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Scott Davis again, Thurston County Public Works in the Washington State, and thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Hillary. Okay, so let's see if my advancing thing here works. There we go. So I kind of have 2 components of the presentation. One is talking a little bit about 2014 HSIP program for counties, and then and that's going to be more of a statewide kind of overview of the HSI, how the state approaches HSIP funding for local agencies, and then we'll dive in a little bit to take a look at how Thurston County has been investing in safety and how we've done it in recent years, and also kind of a snapshot of where we see ourselves going moving forward from today. All right, so I think I went a little fast here. There we go. All right, so there are 39 counties in the state of Washington, and the counties account for over 39,000 centerline miles of roadway, but less than 20% of the vehicle miles traveled in the state of Washington, which probably isn't too surprising. The fatality rate is 1.58 per million vehicle miles traveled, which is about 3 times the rate of that in the cities and 2 times that on state highways. So all this data really leads counties to be a high priority for safety investments in Washington State, and one reason why the state has provided funding, and especially in particular Federal Highway Safety Improvement Program funding to local agencies, in particular counties in Washington State. Oh, geez, going the wrong direction.
I'll go ahead and move it from this side.
Yeah, sorry about that. I have a little technical difficulties here, so I had to log in another computer. The first one wasn't showing the screen. So anyway, all right. So the state of Washington became a zero-goal state in 2000, which is probably maybe one of the first states that established that as a goal. And that goal now is eliminating fatalities and serious injuries by 2030, which is a fairly aggressive goal. But the state, and maybe more importantly, the state's committed to a data-driven and all-roads approach to safety. And so I'm going to repeat that again, is data-driven, all-roads approach to safety. And so, for example, 70% of the fatal and serious injuries, or reported serious injuries, occur on local roads within the state of Washington. And this reflects the funding distribution for the HSIP program in Washington State. So yeah, if you're a local official, you go, great, we have access to more money, but it also means we also have a larger share of the responsibility to achieve our statewide goals of eliminating fatalities and serious injuries. All right, so in 2014, there was a call for projects, and in past programs, the state typically told us what crash type to focus in on, such as roadway departure, and required low-cost, widespread improvements. So it was very prescriptive, I guess. This time they asked us to identify our own priorities based on our own county-specific data. And like past calls for projects, the focus is generally on low-cost, widespread improvements, but not limited to the low-cost investments. The minimum level of funding identified by the state was $400,000. So if you're a county and you submitted a local road safety plan, you're guaranteed at least get $400,000, but the maximum was in part based on the total number of fatalities and serious injuries in the county. So it was kind of graduated from that perspective. The state emphasized the use of the Systemic Safety Project Selection Tool, which if you're interested in is an entire presentation onto itself, but it wasn't restricted to that. Summing this all up, really the state was really asking all of us to kind of step up our game. Instead of being prescriptive and telling us how to go about putting together safety investments in our agencies, they wanted us to really do our own plan and determine our own priorities, which is something that at least I preferred personally. But they didn't leave us hanging, because that was a pretty big lift for us. Most of us never have done anything like this before, and so they did give us some training along the way. All right. So they held 8 workshops throughout the state in 2014, or early part of 2014, and the workshops provided an overview of the grant program, evaluating summary level crash data, and evaluating systemic safety applications, or an example, I guess, of it on a county roadway system. And we're not going to get in really summary level crash data, but the approach is really different in this respect. Is instead of just giving us all the crash data or all the information, because we actually have access to that already, but it was taking all the crash data in each of our counties and summarizing. So, we knew based on what's reported in the crash reports, how many were in horizontal curves versus straight roads. We had all the data for time of day, weather conditions, and whether they're, and also the different causations that are on the crash reports. And so that was great, because all of a sudden, we had all the information we need to help start prioritizing our efforts. Because it's generally, at least from my perspective, I think a lot of us, doing data analysis isn't that hard. It's finding the time to do it, since we do so many things every day and wear so many hats as local officials. So that was really helpful, and it was really a change from what DOT was doing before, and I think was personally helpful to us in Thurston County. Then the state worked with Federal Highway Resource Center, and we held 3 systemic safety product selection tool workshops throughout the state in different geographical areas, and that helped provide training on the tool itself and help us identify focused crash types and data analysis and screening and prioritizing project sites and corridors. Because if you're not familiar with the systemic safety project selection tool, it's a little different than doing hotspot and crash rates. It's really looking more at risk and risk factors, and so it's a little bit more of a proactive approach. But it's just a little bit different way of looking at your crash data than we had probably in the past, and many of the tools that we'd used in the past. So results are always good. So at the end of in 2014, when all the plans were due, 31 out of 39 counties submitted local road safety plans. Since it's the Wild West, we also had 31 different approaches, but we all did them ourselves. So the chat pod question for was, did consultants or did agencies do them? In this case, it was do it yourself by the agencies. And so that was pretty impressive, I thought. The goals use data and to base our decisions on, and that's exactly what the state got. The views on the program aren't perfect, of course, because preparing a plan takes commitment, and that's hard for almost any size agency, but more specifically for some of the smaller counties in the state. But based on some polling data, that commitment varied from a couple of weeks of staff time to over 500 hours. So you can see the level of commitment and probably the detail varied from 2 to 3 page local road safety plan to a lot larger, robust one. But the other thing in terms of the effort too is that agencies identified more work than was funded. You could use the same plan again to resubmit later on, and that's actually what we've done a few times already. Is we identified more projects than we knew we were going to get money for, but we just resubmitted and repackaged it the next time the HSIP program rolled around again. The data analysis also made it a lot easier for the state to approve funding requests. One county requested livestock fencing. We don't have that much open range land in this state, but in that county. Apparently black cows are walking across the street at night are hard to see. I'm not sure why, but anyway, the data reflected the issue and certainly supported the staff knowledge of the roadway system. And, that probably wouldn't have been funded before, but it was part of their safety plan, and the state funded it. And, now the fencing's up, and there's not an issue there anymore. Finally, the counties, all the counties that responded to a survey, too, thought this exercise was useful to identify safety priorities, and all responding counties said they'd resubmit under similar programs in the future. And in fact, in 2016, same program rolled out again, and in that year, 33 counties submitted local road safety plans instead of 31. So we ramped it up another 2 counties. So that's progress, that's for sure. So, all right, now we're going to dive into Thurston County a little bit, or at least take a high-level overview how we've recently been funding safety improvements, and then again, as I mentioned earlier, we'll take a look at how we kind of see ourselves moving forward. All right, so a little bit about Thurston County. Thurston County is one of the 39 counties in the state of Washington. We're about an hour south of Seattle. We're about 2 hours north of Portland, Oregon. We are home to the state capital of Olympia, and our population is starting to push about 270,000 right now. We have 6 cities, a town, a portion of Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Actually, a good chunk of our county is part of Joint Base Lewis-McChord, and also 3 Native American tribes. For us, about 2/3 of our roadway system is considered rural, or rural to us. And rural for us is about 1 home per 5 to 20 acres, generally speaking. We do have some forest lands in the southeast area and the western portion of the county. So, all right. So this next slide is really, this is like one slide. It's actually almost an entire presentation rolled up into one. So just to caveat it, if you have some interest in what we did, or even actually what other counties did in the state of Washington for preparing local road safety plans, send me an email. My contact information's at the end, and I can either get you information or make sure I can connect you to the right people, because this is definitely a high-level overview. So we started our local road safety plan in 2012, and it was a few years before it became a requirement for federal funds. This effort was started in part because with limited resources as an agency, we really wanted to determine how best to make the biggest impact with the funding that we had available. And this was really the first time we looked at our data comprehensively across the system. It's not like we didn't look at data. We used pen maps and crash rates and all those things, but really didn't get into all the different causations and some of the and a little bit more deeper dive into the data to help us focus our attention where we needed to. So the study period we did then was 2006 to 2010, when we had 177 fatal and reported serious crashes on our county roads. But it really became clear almost immediately for us when almost 50% of these fatal and reported serious crashes were in, or reported to be in, horizontal curves. We also know that horizontal curves are a pretty small portion of our overall roadway system, so we felt that if we can make some targeted investments, we probably could have an impact on our number of crashes and our crash rates and improve the overall safety performance of our roadway system. All right, so part of our local road safety plan effort really is to put Thurston County in a good position to secure outside funding, including HSIP dollars. And so during the development process, we specifically invited some of our funding partners to participate with us, not only just because we're learning a whole new process, but we wanted them to learn the systemic safety tool, so that's the tool that we use. But we also wanted to make sure they knew we were committed to safety and using data to help drive our decisions. And so, and so also we didn't have to, and it was also telling our story we're also telling our story to them by having them participate in our stakeholder committee, so we didn't have to retell it maybe as much detail when we actually started to apply for funding. So since 2012, when we completed our first local road safety plan, we've secured roughly about $6 million in HSIP funds. We've also received, indirectly smaller amounts from other sources to do some speed feedback signs, also support for safe routes to school efforts and other bike and pedestrian safety projects as well. All right, so implementation, what we did. So the quantities and the numbers on here, they represent actually work done over several HSIP programs. So the state does a call every few years, and so we participate as they come up. So we've obviously bundled and bundled projects over different programs over the years. And some of the work, though, wasn't all done through the HSIP program. We've done actually quite a bit of signing work for a lot of years through just our own maintenance programs. And in regards to our safety plan and what we did here, there's a few roads that we didn't include in our HSIP applications, a few high-speed locally classified roadways that we had. It had a lot of curves. We had some serious crashes on them. And so I don't know if our staff was excited, but we installed well over 100 chevrons, chevron and arrow signs. But the nice thing about it is we knew we improved the safety in those roadways, but also the community that was using those roadways did comment and stop and thank us for the work we're doing. And you don't always get that as a local official or even a public official. So generally when you get that and people go out of their way to do that, you know they're appreciating the work we're doing. So, but again, a lot of this early implementation stuff was primarily through the federal program, but we did augment that with our maintenance forces too. We also did some wide edge lines, about 10 line miles, with our own paint crews as well. All right, so results. Always like to have results. So these are kind of more preliminary, but we really started some of this work. Like I mentioned, we've been doing work with the HSIP program for a while, and we started making some investments before we even finished, or in and around when we finished our local road safety plan. So a lot of the work that we had started was wrapped up in around 2015. And so from 2012 to 2016, we saw a 35% reduction in fatal and reported serious crashes in horizontal curves, which, I don't know, we thought that was a pretty good reduction, but also it happened to be about 70% of the total reduction we saw during those two different study periods. Now, granted, this is a simple before and after, but I think it does show that our targeted investments had an impact on our roadway system. And the great thing about this now is, as we move forward and talk to our elected officials and our executives, we can actually talk not just about what we're doing, but also the impact of what we're doing as well. And if you're into kind of the benefit cost type of analysis, because I know some HSIP programs require that, the rough calculations is about a 15-to-1 benefit to cost ratio, which I think is pretty good. In regards to the political aspects of this effort, doing systemic and system-wide investments really has transformed our answers to the community. So when a constituent contacts our county commissioners or our executive in our own department, we can typically say we've done 2 to 3 things on the road or roads they're concerned about. And really this is a stark contrast to how we have approached it in the past where we focus primarily on hot spots or crash rates, which were more targeted, but certainly not encompassing a lot of the county. And so again, it shows that we care, we are doing something, we are being proactive, and we're trying to do something before something happens versus waiting for a dot to show up on a map. All right, so now we're going to take a look at really how we're, at least right now anyway, we're looking at how we might be financing safety investments moving forward. And part of that is because, oops, I went a little fast again. Sorry about that. So part of that is because we just finished, well, I shouldn't say it's not quite finished yet, but we have a draft copy of our new local road safety plan that we're reviewing right now. And this time we hired consultants. We used HSIP funding through the state to do this because we really wanted to have a little bit more comprehensive effort than the previous time, and this allowed us, and hiring a consultant allowed us to do that just because of our limited staff time, and also it's better documented. Although I think what we did in 2012 was great, it's worked well. The results I think speak to that, but we probably could have documented it a lot better than we did, and so certainly this helps us do that. So when it's all said and done, over the next 10 years, we're going to at least try to tackle about $15 million in new safety investments. And that's actually quite a bit for us. It's not, I don't know if that's realistic or not, but that's what we're shooting for. And overall, the plan identified about $30 million in improvements, and that's on the low side because we really didn't tackle the non-motorized and intersections in as great detail as we probably could have. But again, those are a little bit lower on our priority rate because lane departure is about 70% of our fatal and serious crashes in Thurston County. Based on the data period or the study period we looked at in this one. So again, we're really still focusing on lane departures, our primary area. So when we took a look at developing the plan, we really looked at two pots to kind of look in, and one is local and the other is federal. Although the federal could be grants in general, I guess, but we just classified it as that. So generally speaking, where Thurston County can provide more cost-effective improvements, we put it in the local column. So that's really signing and marking. For more complicated projects require more design, maybe a right-of-way effort or a right-of-way phase, those generally fell into the federally funded or grant-funded category. And as just like in all the states, there's several different sources of federal dollars. There's Safe Route to School. There's STP funding, and also in the state of Washington, there's other state funding sources as well. So we have a little bit of work to do that we haven't done yet to really cobble together a more comprehensive implementation plan. But our first step is really to walk through the data-driven process to identify and prioritize those safety investments. And so that next step is really to package these up into projects that we could submit for money for, but also start identifying what sources we feel that we should be using to implement these investments. All right, so as we get into it, as you notice the category, I had the federal funding kind of led down to more of a capital program, traditional capital program, design, bid, build type of approach. And then there's the maintenance piece and maintenance program. And so what I want to talk a little bit is the maintenance program first and how we're approaching safety, and then also get into, and then we'll touch on the capital program, and then also touch into highlight a special taxing district that we're looking at right now. So one of our first priorities, and it's been for a while for our entire department, is taking care of what we have. That's probably one of the most important things that we can do is what we have out there right now, we need to take care of it. And so, for us, at least from a traffic standpoint, first thing is an inventory of the assets. And so we've had an electronic inventory of our signs for quite a while. We are now working on inventorying other assets, including our school beacons and traffic markings and all those kinds of things. Because, it's really hard to take care of what you have if you don't know what you have and where it's at. And so asset management helps with that. Well-trained team, good tools, procedures are very important. So, we invest in training equipment, and through the FHWA accreditation process, we really documented a lot of the procedures that resided in our heads for many years. And so that's been helpful, especially on onboarding new people. And then, even like the training with a recession, it just seems like it was just yesterday, but I guess it's about 10 years ago now when it started. But, our department didn't reduce our training budget. And I know a lot of folks did. Even I know our state DOT did. But that was one area that we held firm on in terms of our leadership. And that's important because our people are the most important thing that we have to implement any program. So we need to invest in our teams. In regards to tools, past several years we've been investing in swap loader trucks. So that's basically a detachable bed on a standard type of truck. So for us, it's the Ford 450, 550 type of vehicles. So depending on the daily assignment, we could be pulling up a thermoplastic bed, a sign bed, a traffic control bed, or maybe even depending on if it's the winter time, there's flooding, maybe an emergency response bed to help close roads and do other things. And so that's actually really helpful, especially a selling point when we can talk to our elected officials and say, hey, we are buying a more expensive piece of equipment, but guess all the things that we can do with this one truck, and we don't have to buy another one to do all these separate specialized activities and have it sit for most of the year. So it actually, even though some upfront cost or maybe a little bit higher initially, the flexibility for us helps reduce costs and maximize the use of the equipment we do have. Again, taking care of what we have, a down sign isn't really useful. we used wood posts for forever, and you go out Western Washington, it's wet a lot, so wood doesn't last that long. So when the post doesn't last as long as the sign, that's a problem. And so back in 2000, we began switching out our cedar posts and pressure-treated posts to steel and concrete bases. Now that's a lot of work, because when we have about 16 to 17,000 signs, it's a lot of posts to replace. It took us about 10 years to do the conversion. We did it all or mostly through local funds. But now, one of the payoffs to that investment is we have staff rarely get called out for after hours for stop signs and down signs, and our signs are upright and serving their purposes, which is what we want. And that improves safety in and itself. And so in terms of taking care of our signs, past 18 years, we've budgeted in totality, over $2 million just for sign maintenance supplies. And so I don't know, that may be a lot or a little depending on your agency, and the right amounts somewhat is certainly relative based on your own agency, but this funding that we've dedicated to signing, it's about 0.5% the total road maintenance budget for Thurston County, but yet I think we've had a big impact because we've upgraded all of our signs, well, not all the guide signs yet, like street name signs, but all of our regulatory, our warning signs, all those are HIP sheeting, our high-intensity prismatic sheeting now. And that's been in place for a while. We've added a lot of new chevrons and curve signs based on engineering studies or custom concerns from the community. And we've done a lot of those things over the years, all just through our own maintenance program. And again, it's a pretty small investment, to maintain what you have, but also to improve safety on our roadway system. All right, so system improvements. So implementation of signing for our local road safety plan, including our local forces doing most of the work, because generally we can do it less for a contractor, but also we can implement at our own pace and budget. So we don't necessarily have to have everything done in 1 year. We can spread it out over a few years. And this also includes adding post delineation to targeted curves as well. We don't have that much more curve signing to do, generally speaking, but we are looking at targeted work of adding the post delineation to some locations. Also, wide edge lines are planned to be installed by local forces because we can do the work for about $1,000 a mile, about half or a quarter of what a contractor might charge us. But I will note that we're going to be fairly cautious as we implement this because, for us, painting a road, maybe doing it 1 year is great, but we paint every year because we use latex paint, and so we put a new coat on every year, at least on our arterial and collector roadways. And so that $1,000 a mile adds up pretty fast. And so what we're looking at doing is doing some targeted work initially, maintaining what we already have out there, and then what we'll be doing over the next couple of years is developing a more robust business case for a budget request when we start redoing our budget again in 2020. I should note, at least right now, we're looking at doing 8-inch edge lines versus a 6. I know a lot of folks do 6, but it's just our paint truck set up to do that, and it's a little bit easier, and quite frankly, it matches in with how we treat bike lanes in urban areas, and certainly a lot more visible in our narrow roadways, especially in the fall when we have a lot of debris and other things that are collecting at the edge of the roadways. But we may look back, we may adjust to the 6 just to get more mileage, depending on what funding we get available or have available to us in the future. All right, so the capital program. These are just some examples that we identified as part of our local road safety plan, and most of these require some sort of design effort. A few interesting notes. When we conducted our stakeholder partnering for our safety plan, one of the comments from our law enforcement officials, because speeding is an issue here just like it is in most counties, was the need for pullouts to conduct enforcement, because a lot of our roads are narrow, there's no place to pull, so even if we asked them or they wanted to do enforcement, they couldn't because there's no place to safely be out the road and start using their radar gun to look for folks who are driving faster than conditions warrant or whatever the speed limit is. Also for speed feedback signs, what we're planning on doing those is not buying a whole bunch of those, but really set up more stations. What we've really found is we probably either need to have them connected to power or have a more robust set of batteries to keep them going, especially in higher traffic conditions. In the wintertime, when it's a bit more cloudy and there's not as much sun. And then we'll have some stations set up throughout the county on targeted roadways, and then at that point we'll probably rotate a smaller set of signs around. So one, we have fewer signs to maintain, but also when we do put them someplace, we just plug them in, and it's not a huge burden on our maintenance staff. So because it's something we want to be cognizant of. Again, is before we put something out there, we want to be somewhat sure we can maintain it and we can sustain it. Because if we can't, then we're not really providing that long-term safety benefit that we're looking for. So one of the photos on there is just a recent road upgrade. It's kind of a typical one for us now. So it's a shoulder widening, roadside improvements. You can see some guardrail there in this case, but also rumble strips. So that's more of a standard practice for us now. It wasn't a while ago, but now it is. This is a new project, and we did put in rumble strips on the shoulder as well as center line. Now, for our local road safety plan, and what we're trying to do there is we're not going to be doing the shoulder widening. We're just doing more of the clear zone work, so flattening slopes, remove objects, guardrail, that kind of approach in terms of trying to make the roadside a little bit more forgivable. So we're not going to be doing the plan isn't to do big road widening projects other than maybe some targeted areas at a few specified curves based on our local road safety plans. Okay, so I'm not sure if you noticed, I had a little gray box in there, and I didn't touch on it on the beginning slide, but we have formed a transportation benefit district, which is a special taxing district called out or allowed under state law in Washington State. We formed this district in 2014, actually, but due to changes in our, doing elections and new commissioners, we haven't funded it yet. So what we've been doing since then is taking time to educate and inform our elected officials. A year or so ago, we spent time doing some outreach to community groups and what a transportation benefit district is, what it can do, and some of the reasons why the county is considering it. And part of that is the mission. Our mission is preservation, safety, and technology. And preservation is kind of what I mentioned earlier, is taking care of what you have right now. So it's primarily paving, but preservation is a lot more than paving. Safety, if this goes through, probably a lot of the white edge line work that we have identified in our safety plan would be funded through this, depending on the overall priorities that our county commissioners set up. And what we're looking to do and moving forward is right now is we're actually working on a plan to start doing more of a community survey and polling to really gauge what the community's interest in transportation, what they see the needs are, and then if they're willing to fund more, pay for something, what might that be? And so we're going to bring that back with other information to our county commissioners later this year, and hopefully see what kind of decision they make. At least at that point, it'll be a fully informed decision. They'll have at least we'll have some gauge of what the community's thinking as well. And so anyway, we'll see what happens. But anyway, we can expect, depending on the revenue source and how it plays out, $1 to $4 million annually. Anyway, we'll wait and see on that. But I'm hoping we can pull it off. But those increasing fees, taxes is a difficult decision. And as any county agency, there's a lot of priorities out there. There's a lot of things going on, and what we do and what we provide is just part and a piece of the decision-making process. All right, so so let's see here. Oh wait, yep. Oh, I think this got misplaced, but anyway, so this was so in a different spot. So anyway, so this is the funding. So this is the funding slide. So as you can see, the draft local road safety plan on there, and then there's we're looking at trying to do $15 million over the next 10 years or so, and then it's kind of broken down between grant and local, and then the special taxing district, which may or may not be part of our future. And then this is really kind of highlighting. How we're doing our business, how it's changed. Really, as we started looking at a more data-driven approach, how we view things has changed too. And, I'll take roundabouts, for example. 15 years ago, roundabouts wasn't the first thing we thought of before we did anything. We knew it was there, a tool, but, honestly, when we're really doing reviewing traffic control and considering new traffic control at an intersection, roundabouts are one of the first options we consider. Rumble strips, as you saw in a photo earlier, is more of a standard practice, and so there's a lot of things that become more of a standard practice for us now that weren't really before, as we really dived a little bit deeper into safety and try to incorporate it throughout our department. And so this is just some of the examples of things that are more routinely considered as part of our projects and part of what we do than it was in the past. All right, I think that is it. Thank you. And I'll take a look at the chat pod here, and then I guess we'll go through some questions. Are we going to do questions now, Jamie, or are we going to wait a little bit till the end?
So we are going to hold off on questions for now, just to make sure we get through all of our speakers. We will do the poll questions and answer any chat pod questions you have at the end. Please continue to put them in the chat pod as we go through, and that way, if for some reason, like in the July webinar, we don't get through all of them, I will provide the written version of them to our speakers and have them provide us with feedback to send out to all of you. So please do keep putting those into the chat pod as your questions come up, and we will get you answers. So at this point, thank you, Scott, for that great information. And now we're going to hear from Karen Scurry, and she's going to talk a little bit about the federal side.
Great, thank you, Jamie, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Highway Safety Improvement Program today and talk a little bit about how you can use HSIP funds for local safety projects. So based on the responses to one of the earlier polls, it seems that a majority of you are already using HSIP funds for local safety projects, which is great. So the Highway Safety Improvement Program is a core federal aid program. Each year, states receive about $2.5 billion, or about 6% of their total federal aid apportionment, to deliver safety projects. And so I think we saw in the response to that earlier poll question that some of you are using some of these other federal funds for safety projects too, and that's great. These funds can be used for safety projects as well, subject to that program-specific eligibility criteria, but the HSIP is specifically set aside for explicit safety projects. And the purpose of the HSIP is to reduce fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads, and all public roads includes non-state-owned roads and roads on tribal land. And I think this is important because this is unique to the HSIP. We're one of the only federal aid programs that can actually, the funds can actually be used for local roads. And so I think that gets to, we talked about our vision of 0 deaths on our nation's highways, and so this program allows us to reach those local roads and improve safety on all public roads. So like other federal aid programs, the HSIP is a federally funded, state-administered program, which means that Federal Highway establishes the requirements, the general requirements for the program, and then each state develops and implements a program that best meets their needs. And I'm sure you can imagine that results in 51 different HSIPs. But what they do have in common is that each HSIP is based in strategic safety planning, which guides a data-driven safety management process and results in the implementation of highway safety improvement projects. So what makes a project eligible for HSIP funds? This is one of the most frequently asked questions that I get from both the states and the division offices. And the short answer is that it depends on what state you're in, as each state's requirements can be slightly different. But in general, I would say that all HSIP projects must address an SHSP priority, and that's the Strategic Highway Safety Plan that Hillary mentioned earlier, be identified through a data-driven process, and contribute to a reduction in fatalities and serious injuries. And so if your project meets these general eligibility criteria and most importantly targets the identified safety issue, it would generally be eligible for HSIP funds. And so we'll walk through each of these steps here just to give you a better sense of what each one means. So all the highway safety improvement projects must be consistent with the state's strategic highway safety plan. And as Hillary mentioned, every state has an SHSP that defines their key safety needs for the state, as well as strategies to address those safety needs. The SHSP is a comprehensive plan that addresses safety across all 4 E's. So you'll see safety needs and strategies for engineering, enforcement, education, and emergency response. So I would suggest that if you're not familiar with your state strategic highway safety plan, to take a look through it and see how local road safety is addressed. If it's not addressed directly, which it's not in many of the strategic highway safety plans, then consider how your community safety needs might align with those identified in the strategic highway safety plan. So if you're a rural community with roadway departure crashes, what types of roadway departure strategies are identified in the plan? Or if you're an urban community, maybe you're more concerned with pedestrian safety, and look in the strategic highway safety plan to see how the state is addressing that. Maybe there'll be some unique or innovative strategies that you might not have considered. So use the Strategic Highway Safety Plan as a tool to help guide your local safety efforts. And if it's not really providing you the direction that you need, Hillary and Scott both talked about local road safety plans and how helpful they are at helping you to define your safety priorities specific for your community. So that might be another option as well to help drive your safety program at the local level. So the second part of that general eligibility criteria is that all highway safety improvement projects must also be identified through a data-driven process. And so the foundation of the highway safety improvement program is what we commonly refer to as the roadway safety management process. And for the purposes of the HSIP, this includes three components: planning, implementation, and evaluation, which is shown here in the purple boxes. And so within planning, there are three basic steps, and as a local agency, you would likely be looking at the first two steps here, so identifying your problems and then identifying countermeasures to address those problems. If you're submitting applications for the HSIP up to the state level, they would likely be the ones that would be prioritizing those projects, either based on benefit cost analysis or some other criteria that they have defined for their program. So when you first identify your problems, you use some sort of network screening process, and this can be done through a traditional site analysis process where you would identify high crash locations. This is most common. Folks are familiar with this approach, and this is easy to justify. You know, I have crashes here. Let me identify some countermeasures and improve this one location. Or highway safety improvement projects can also be identified based on the potential for future crashes. And so Scott talked a little bit about the systemic approach, and this is one method that you could use to estimate that potential for future crashes. So that would be where you'd identify roadway features that are correlated with particular crash types and then implement a specific countermeasure at those locations with the greatest risk for potential future crashes. So I would say, just showing here a couple of examples of highway safety improvement projects, I would say that HSIP funds are primarily eligible for infrastructure safety improvements, not so much the non-infrastructure type of education and enforcement type activities. Those are eligible under some of the NHTSA highway safety programs, and that the highway safety improvement projects typically address our three primary focus areas of roadway departure, intersection, and pedestrians. And these just show some of the examples of the types of projects that we see funded with HSIP funds. In addition to your typical infrastructure solutions, HSIP funds are also eligible for the collection, analysis, and improvement of safety data, road safety audits, as well as transportation safety planning activities, which would include the development of local road safety plans. So HSIP funds can be used for those activities as well. So I think one of the key takeaways from my presentation is that the HSIP is a federally funded but state administered program. And so I described that earlier as meaning that Federal Highway establishes the general program requirements, and then each state develops and administers a program to best meet their needs. So depending on what state you're in, you know, that state DOT would describe what the requirements are for your local agency. So I would encourage you, if you don't already have a relationship with them, to reach out and find out what the requirements are for your state's HSIP. So the opportunities and requirements vary by state. So some states have a statewide competitive application process where state and local projects compete with one another. Other states set aside funding for local safety projects where local projects compete only with each other. And so this map shows you which states are obligating HSIP funds towards local safety projects. This information is taken from the 2017 HSIP reports, which are available on our website. And on average, about 15% of HSIP funds are obligated toward local safety projects. As you can see from this map, there's about 7 states that do not report obligating any HSIP funds on local roads, and for some of those states, that's because that state owns and operates a majority of their roads, like North Carolina, South Carolina, and West Virginia. On the other hand, there are other states who those that are shaded the darkest on this map, that obligate more than 50% of their HSIP funds for local roads. So there's a wide range of experience in using HSIP for local road safety projects across the nation. So just as HSIP opportunities and requirements vary by states, it's also interesting to note that the local road safety programs are organized and administered differently from state to state. And so this just shows the different organizational arrangements DOTs use to manage local road safety projects. In many cases, local road safety projects are identified and administered through a DOT Department of Division of Local Aid or similar. In other cases, there are separate entities responsible for the local road safety program, and that might be the state DOT safety office or the local technical assistance program, or in a few states, the metropolitan planning organizations administer the HSIP for local road safety projects. A number of states also use a hybrid approach where the centralized local safety program manages the project identification and prioritization, but then the local aid division or maybe even the districts within the DOT handle the project administration. And then in other states, it's a completely decentralized approach, where project development and administration are administered at the DOT district level. So there are many different approaches to developing and administering local road safety programs and projects across the states. I think this is why it's important to become familiar with the practices in your particular state, and why it's so hard to deliver an HSIP presentation from a national perspective. One other thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit was the levels of support that are provided by the DOTs or the states in general. It may not always be the DOTs. The level of assistance that DOTs provide to local agencies also varies across the states. We did a study several years ago to find out the extent to which states were funding local safety projects, providing training and technical assistance to local agencies. And what we found was that, that level of support varies across the states. So in some states, they're providing local agencies access to resources and information necessary for project identification, development, and implementation. In other states, they might take it a little bit further, and in addition to providing information and resources, the DOTs provide training and development opportunities for local agency engineers, planners, and public or elected officials. At the next level, states also provide technical assistance to local agencies to help with identifying and developing local safety projects. And then at the highest level, some DOTs actually take responsibility for project development, administration, and implementation on behalf of the local agencies. So what was interesting to me from this study was that, the level of support not only varies across states, but even within a state. So, the level of support that one local agency needs might vary compared to another local agency within the same state. And so it takes a great deal of commitment from the state DOT to really invest and spend some of these HSIP funds on local roads. And I did want to mention that, I keep saying DOT, but it's not only the DOT. In many states, the local technical assistance program is a very strong partner in advancing local road safety efforts. So if you're in a state and you're not familiar with your local technical assistance program, they provide technical assistance to local counties, cities, towns through training programs, information dissemination, technical assistance, newsletters. They're usually housed either within the DOT, a university, or at another public agency. And they vary widely across the states in terms of the types of support that they provide, but it's always a good place to go as a first step to see what type of assistance they do offer and how they might be able to help you advance your local road safety efforts. So what we've seen is that it's not enough to just make funding available for local safety projects. We have found that it takes, like I said, commitment from both the state DOTs and the local agencies and other partners such as MPOs and LTAPs to really deliver local safety projects. And so I'm just going to talk about a couple of the noteworthy practices that we found or seen across the country that are offered by states to support local safety efforts. So in terms of providing resources and information, of course, if the state offers HSIP funds to local agencies, there's usually guidance and application packages that go along with that. But states also provide local agencies with access to data analysis tools so that the local agency could do some analysis on their own to better understand what the safety problems are in their jurisdiction. In some cases, like Scott said, you just don't have the time to do the analysis. So in some states, they actually do the analysis and share those results with the local agencies. So they'll deliver them a list of high crash locations, or they'll set the stage for that systemic safety analysis and start to filter out some of those focused crash types. For training and development, we've seen states provide training to meet local agency needs. So, some states are doing training on the Highway Safety Manual, other states are doing training on low-cost safety countermeasures, on how to successfully complete an application. So there's a wide variety of training that's being offered through the states and LTAPs. Some states also hold an annual safety summit or a peer exchange for local agencies to share some of their experiences and noteworthy practices with each other. I found that that's a great way for locals within a state to just share some of their war stories, some of their success stories, and advance local safety efforts that way. Many states also provide technical assistance to local agencies through conducting road safety audits. So if a local agency has a safety problem but they're not quite sure what to do about it, they might contact the state DOT and request a road safety audit, or the LTAP, or the MPO, depending on what the case is in your state. Some agencies also provide assistance in preparing the applications or in doing design for the local safety projects. I know that that's quite popular with some of the New Jersey MPOs, the design assistance for their local safety projects. And we're starting to see more and more states mostly through their LTAP centers, but some in the state DOTs as well, establishing a safety circuit rider position. So that's a person that's dedicated to providing technical assistance to local agencies on various safety issues. Related to project implementation, it's not, once you've identified the project and you've been awarded for the funding for the project, I think then the hardest part starts in administering that federal aid project. We know that that's not easy, and there have been several states that have been able to implement some practices to streamline that process, whether that's streamlining environmental documentation for projects with minor impacts, or some states have been able to bundle local projects by district for delivery to I guess, minimize that burden of delivering a federal aid project. Some agencies also fund local safety projects at 100%. So we've heard that the match can sometimes be troublesome for local agencies, and so HSIP is a 90%, 90-10 match, and so in some states the state either covers that 10% match, or certain safety projects are eligible at 100% federal funding, and so they're able to fund some local safety projects at 100%. And then the last one that I wanted to mention is that, in some cases it may be challenging to implement new or innovative countermeasures, and some local agencies have had success piloting a countermeasure or doing a demonstration project for a particular countermeasure and then build support that way, not only within their own community but with their neighboring communities as well. There are two other federal safety funding opportunities that I wanted to mention in addition to the HSIP. There is no longer a specific set aside for high-risk rural roads, but if the fatality rate on rural roads in a particular state increases over a 2-year period, then we require the state to set aside a specific, a certain amount of funding for projects on high-risk rural roads. And the state must obligate that funding within the next fiscal year. So they have 1 year to obligate that funding. And some states have trouble with this. And so this is a great opportunity, you know, as a local agency, if you have a project on what the state defines as a high-risk rural road, you can maybe submit an application and get that project funded if the state is subject to the high-risk rural road special rule. And there are 17 states that fall into that category for fiscal year 19, so starting October 1st. And then the other program that I wanted to mention is the Tribal Transportation Program Safety Fund. So I did mention earlier, I don't know if you caught it, but HSIP funds can be used on tribal roads. I know California has recently established a set-aside of their HSIP for tribal safety projects, which is awesome, and I can't wait to see how that works out. But through our Federal Lands Highway Division, there is a specific funding opportunity for tribal transportation safety projects. We have $9 million set aside annually for competitive safety projects. In those projects can be safety plans, data projects, or infrastructure projects. The applications must be data-driven and supported by a safety plan, and there's usually an annual call nationwide that's sent out for that program. And for additional information, I've included the web link here, or I can put you in touch with Adam Larson, who manages that program, if you need more information. So just to wrap up with some final thoughts and takeaways for you as you leave today's webinar, just a reminder that HSIP is for all public roads. There's a reason for that. We're trying to reduce fatalities and serious injuries, even on local roads, and so HSIP funds can be used on all public roads, including local roads and tribal roads. I think I've mentioned multiple times now, but HSIP opportunities and requirements vary by state, so check with your state DOT to see what opportunities are available to you and what the requirements might be for requesting HSIP funds in your state. All highway safety improvement projects must be consistent with the state FHSP, I'm sorry for that typo there, the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, and correct or improve a hazardous road location or feature or address a highway safety problem. So that gets to that data-driven process. All projects must be identified through a data-driven process. And then lastly, I would just encourage you to partner with your peers or state partners to overcome challenges. We're going to face challenges, especially in delivering safety projects through the federal aid program on local roads. But I would just remind you that people depend on our efforts to ensure that they get home safely each night. So while there will be challenges, I think we can work together to get past them. I think we've heard from all the presenters today that success requires commitment from everyone. And so I think we should all work together to do our part to advance local safety projects. And then just one last slide is resources that are available on our website to help you advance local road safety projects. I would encourage you to visit our website that I have listed here to see what's available to support your needs. I've included some items that might be of interest to you. And you can also link to the state's strategic highway safety plans from this site as well. So when you have time after today's webinar, I would encourage you to explore our website. And if you're looking for something in particular that you can't find, please reach out to me at any time, and I'll be happy to help.
Perfect. Very much, Karen. And in light of the time, we are going to continue right on to Donna, but I do want to encourage everyone again to keep putting your questions in the chat pod. I know if you did put questions in earlier, please go ahead and look. Scott did go through and answer all of those in the chat pod, and we'll ask Karen to go ahead and do that as well. I do see a few in there for you as well, Karen, if you wouldn't mind putting the answers right directly in the chat pod.
Sure.
And so, Donna, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to speak a little bit on a program that we're shifting the way we do all of our funding in the state, and it's called SWAP. And then I'm going to touch just briefly on a couple of our safety programs that we think are good and would like to highlight. So what is federal aid SWAP? Well, the state of Iowa gets approximately $500 million per year in federal aid for our highway and bridge projects. Of that, about 2/3 is kept by the DOT, and about 1/3 of that is sent to our local jurisdictions for their usage. About 150 million is going to be able to be swapped, and I'll talk about this briefly on why the other 17 million isn't going to be swapped. But we're going to take the DOT is going to keep that 150 million of federal dollars and replace it with primary road funds. And to do this, we had to change the Iowa code to allow that this primary road fund could be used on non-primary road work. So that was something we had to change. So how did this all come about? This was first concepted in the 1990s, and then in August of 2001, we had our first proposed legislative language change. And then finally, after many iterations and many times of getting denied, on March 23rd, 2017, the governor signed a bill that authorized us to use primary road funds on non-primary roads. When this was signed, we decided that we needed to figure out how we were going to manage and distribute this money. We'd had so many false starts, we hadn't really started planning for it. We weren't sure it was going to come to fruition. So when it finally did, we decided that we were going to have discussions with many of our stakeholders. We held about 12 to 15 meetings with various organizations represented, the Associated General Contractors, Concrete Paving Association, Asphalt Pavers, League of Cities, APWA, several of our county associations, our RPAs, and our MPOs on how we were going to distribute this. We came up with a 1.5-page plan. It was kind of a 30,000-foot overview of what we wanted this to look like and how the money was going to be distributed. And this had to be approved by our Transportation Committee or Commission, and that was approved in February of this year. Some of the ground rules we set at the very beginning with AGC is that they wanted all the projects, AGC wanted all the projects to be let through the department. They like the way that we review the plans and the contract documents. We also are very automated in the state and have been for years. They like the one-stop shop. All the contractors in the state know how to use our automation process, and it's very efficient, and they wanted one place to go for as many of the projects that are done in the state as we possibly could. So that was an easy thing for us to agree to. They also wanted these funds to be used only on construction, so no maintenance work. We also agreed that we would do a dollar for dollar of the, I think, approximately 11 other states that do this. I think we're the only ones that do dollar for dollar. We thought this was going to be an advantageous program for us, so we thought with what we were going to save in personnel time and risk that we thought a dollar for dollar would be a good way to go, and that was definitely supported by AGC. There was a lot of discussion on not requiring Davis-Bacon and Buy America anymore. Our union contractors especially were a little bit up in arms about this, but we pointed out to them that the $500 million in federal aid is still going to be requiring it, and that's what they are used to. So after a lot of discussions on that, everybody calmed down, and then this was passed. One of our caveats is that the amount available for SWAP funds is going to possibly be varied depending upon if there's a federal highway bill that comes through that doesn't allow states to do any swapping anymore. And we also need to make sure that we have a cash flow that can cover it. We do have some rather large projects going on in our state that we're not used to. We have some big river bridges and interstate work that's going on, and we did have some concerns about possible cash flow issues just in case we did talk about this and everybody was agreeable to it. We also said that we are not going to put the money on the stump and turn our back. We are going to have some oversight of all this money, but we're not going to just let everybody have a free-for-all with all this money. I have a real quick side note here, the monkey on the stump. One of our very first presentations we gave on this, one of my employees was looking for money on the stump in Google, and this picture of the monkey kept coming up. So this kind of become our brand for our swap. It seems to calm people down when they see something cute and furry, and we're talking about $150 million worth of work every year. So that's been our little branding that we've been using. So what programs are we going to swap? Well, Surface Transportation Program Block Grant, or STBG. We are going to basically swap all of those funds. One thing that we did decide on, just to make it a little bit easier, is that we were going to include the minor collectors, the federal functional class of minor collectors, into this program. So all collectors and arterials will be covered. Also, our farm-to-market system, We are a rural farming state, and we have a huge farm-to-market system. All of that will also be eligible. And the only thing that we're not going to allow the SWAP funds on to be used on are what are classified under the Federal Functional Classification of local roads. That's a small percentage to a degree of what we have here in the state, and so we're just going to have the locals pay for that with their own local funds. Because Iowa is either number 1 or number 2 in the country, unfortunately, on our bad bridges or deficient bridges, we decided that no matter what the functional class of the road was, we were going to allow bridges to be covered with the SWAP. Another program that we have are the County Highway Bridge Program and the City Bridge Program. This is a carryover from what was the Highway Bridge Replacement and Rehabilitation Program under ICE-T that started in 1991. This has been very successful. Our office, or my office, distributes this money, and we have a very even playing field on how we distribute it. It's been very supported by the cities and the counties for many, many years, and even though the program has gone away, we've continued it. This has been part of the STBG in Iowa for many, many years, even though it's not a federal requirement or a federal program anymore, and now that will also be swapped. Also, our Highway Safety Improvement Program funding will also be swapped. Our HSIP, which was part of the High Risk Rural Roads Program, and we did a lot of replacement of chevrons when it was a requirement under Safety Lieu, and we have continued that program with many other things just besides the chevrons. We allot about $2 million annually for this program. It's only used on the county side because that's where we seem to have our biggest issue. There again, we're a rural state and we have a lot of secondary roads. We continue the program as it was pretty much set up under high-risk rural roads to a big degree, so we still follow a lot of those federal requirements, even though they're not requirements. A couple of our safety programs that I do want to highlight very briefly is we also do have local road safety programs. It is now state funded. Off of our primary road fund, 0.5% is required to be used on safety in the state. So we use that money for things along this line. Currently we have 59 counties that either have local road safety programs either completed or moving towards completion, and we also have included 7 cities, some of our larger cities that have gotten on board. We are looking at maybe funding some more next year and continuing on with this program because we definitely think it is beneficial. One of our other programs that we do like to highlight is our sign program. This is also state funds. This is also off that 0.5%, and we've been doing this for many, many years. This really started up when the MUTCD came out with all the retroreflectivity requirements that were going to be implemented, and we have a lot of cities in Iowa that have population of less than 5,000. In fact, 90% of our 943 cities, I believe we're at right now, 90% of them are under 5,000 population, and we go down all the way to a population of 13 as our smallest city. So some of those cities have trouble getting signs and things up to date and what needs to be out there. So we came up with this program. It started out just giving signs to people that are, or to communities that are under 5,000, and we give them the signs that are made here at the DOT. We also can buy all the poles and posts in bulk, so we get a better price, so they can order whatever signs they need as long as it's a warning or regulatory sign, and the post and all the hardware, and we deliver it to the closest maintenance garage, and all they have to do is go pick it up. We give them instructions on the height and the position of where it has to be, and we tell them that if you have somebody with a post hole digger that wants to go out and put it in, they can do that. We have a person that travels the state quite a bit for other work with the DOT that will spot check on occasion to make sure that these are getting up and in the right place. And we haven't had any issues with this. This has been a very successful program. We do give up to $5,000 worth of signs and posts per city per year if they want it, and up to $10,000 per county. A couple of non-SWAP programs that we have are the Transportation Alternatives, the Federal Recreational Trails, our Iowa Constitution, which we did not want to touch, allots for this primary road fund, which is our license fees, our gas tax, basically our user fees. It has to be used exclusively for construction, maintenance, and supervision of public highways. So we decided that these two programs, there's not a lot of the public highway work in either one of these programs, so we decided we were going to leave those as federal aid. Pros to the swap. The DOT, our folks here at the DOT are used to working with federal aid funds. We treat all of our funds, whether it be state or federal aid, as if it were a federal aid project. And we do this in a very efficient manner. It's the only way that our folks know how to work is with the federal requirements and documentation of the project. So we decided this would be the most efficient use, and our locals sometimes may go for a couple years without any federal aid, and all of a sudden then they have a federal aid project and they have to get up to speed on the extra requirements for federal aid. So we use it very efficiently. It also lowers our DOT oversight requirements. We have an oversight agreement with Iowa Division of FHWA, and we're not going to do some of the in-depth reviews that we have done in the past. We have gone down to about a 20% review or audit of the final project. We are going to spot check. We do want them to continue to use good construction documentation practices and that type of thing, but we're going to not be doing as much in-depth as we have been. We think this reduces the local jurisdiction project costs and delays. We're not exactly sure how much it's going to do. We'll probably have some of those numbers in the next couple years. The first project that can be let under SWAP is slated for the October letting of this year, and will be constructed next year. We'll still have a lot of federal aid going through, but in the next couple of years we should get a better handle on what the locals think that they are saving with this swap. We only really had one con of all of this when it was all announced. I think the locals thought that all federal requirements were going to go away altogether, and they did not. And we also had many people here at the DOT that thought that they were no longer going to have to do anything for the locals. There would not be any oversight at all, no materials testing, nothing was going to be done. That's not quite right, because there are many federal laws that are required no matter what the funding is. So we still have a lot of things that we're still going to be doing. We also want to continue on with not putting the money on the stump and turning our back, but make sure they still continue with some good documentation and practices for their projects. Issues. We work quite a bit with the Federal Highway Administration on what classifies federalization of a project. Basically, if there was a federal action or a dollar spent of federal money on a project, it must continue on through the process as federal aid, so it doesn't look like we're doing any kind of avoidance. So we have projects that are slated for the next 4 years that are still going to be covered with federal aid. This seemed to be one of our biggest issues, was the amount of funding with our contractors. The same amount of funding will still be subject to the federal requirements as there was before SWAP. So a lot of the unions kind of calmed down after we did talk about this. Off-system bridges was a huge issue. The DOT only has about 5,000 bridges out of our 25,000 bridges statewide that are actually DOT. We have none that are off-system. And so we work very closely with Chris Cromwell out of our FHWA Iowa Division to come up with a waiver. And we spend a lot of money, or our locals spend a lot of money on off-system bridges. We documented that in about a 6-page document. And between Chris and Washington, D.C., that got approved. It will be reevaluated annually. And we'll continue on down the road of hopefully being able to swap all of our bridge money to the locals. One thing that we're going to have to do is keep up on our federal requirements. This swap has actually increased the workload in my office. We are going to have to keep up on all of the federal requirements just in case a funding bill changes that, or if somebody has a Tiger grant, or the 2 programs that we are not going to be able to swap. We are going to continue with all of our federal requirements. We have had to improve our state requirements on what we're going to do as far as processes on the state side. Oops. Efficiencies. items that are no longer needed are the DBE commitment, although they can still write it in if they would like. Davis-Bacon wages, not going to be tracking down certified payrolls, not going to be doing wage rate interviews anymore. This is one of the efficiencies that our folks in the local jurisdictions think that they're going to be able to save some time in their administrative costs. Buy America, we're one of the states that got some Canadian melded steel in a few years ago and wasn't caught on the material certifications. It cost us some money and an enormous amount of time to get that all straightened out. That is not going to be required on our SWAP funds because it's a federal requirement. Programming efficiencies, getting our projects into the STIP, we're still going to do that because we are so automated. That's the way we're going to track these. They have different project numbers, so it'll be easy to pull out, but we needed to get them into our automated system somehow. So they're still going to have to go into the STIP, but it's going to be a lot more streamlined. It's going to go right from the counties into the STIP instead of going through an RPA or an MPO. Environmental process efficiencies. There are some savings, although there are still a lot of federal regulations that are going to be applied just because they're the law of the land and aren't tied to the federal funding. We have completely reviewed our process on all of our environmentals, and we've come up with a few more forms that are actually going to help expedite even if it is federal aid. So this has been kind of a win-win situation on our environmental side. Construction oversight efficiencies, this is where we think we're all going to save the most time. We are also in the middle of automating our construction progress documentation, which is also going to take us another level of help in that. And in efficiencies, we are not going to be doing so many audits. We're still going to require material certifications. We want to have good products out there and good materials implemented into our, or incorporated into our construction, but we are no longer going to drill down and make sure that every ounce and every ton of everything is completely covered. We're going to make sure that they know what material certifications are and that they know what tickets for equipment is. We're also in the process of implementing a ticketless system for our trucks in some of our products, so that's another efficiency that we're looking at. They'll be coming down the road hopefully in the next year or two. Project end dates and inactive obligations are going away, although we're still going to continue to keep an eye on that. On the state side, if we start to see a problem with projects not getting closed out, we may in the future implement our own inactive obligations. We think it's only fair to the contractor and to the local, whether they realize it or not, that these projects get closed out in a timely manner. And if you want some more information, we do have a website. We have several documents out there, some of our presentations we've given. We have frequently asked questions that we do update as questions have been coming in, and that's kind of leveled off a little bit. And our SWAP policy is out there that the commission approved, and some of the communications we've had. So this is kind of our communication tool. It's the second thing on our website on the left-hand frame. So people could hopefully see it quickly. We've been trying to rah-rah and tell everybody about this in the state, so this is the place they go to first. And with that, if you have any questions, Nicole Fox is my deputy director, and she's been working very, very detailed into all the funding. She also has the safety background and used to work for a county, so she has a very great background on all the funding. She's a great resource for anything that I talked about today. And I'm the director of the Office of Local Systems, and I'd also be happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Donna. We appreciate your presentation. And due to the time, I'm just going to go ahead and close up. If you do have any final chat pod questions, you can go ahead and put those in over on the left-hand side. Our speakers are answering those as we go on, and any that are remaining after we do end, I will send out to them and provide you guys with the answers afterwards. So today in this webinar, we hope that you learn to list local safety project types and funding sources to summarize examples of local funding, federal funding, and state funding for local safety projects. We do want to let you know that we are having a second webinar this month. It will be for Designing for Rural Bike Safety. It will be on August 16th from 11 to 12:30 p.m. Mountain. Registration for that is currently open and can be found on our registration page on our website. As always, we also record and archive all of these webinars. They can be found on our archived page. We also wanted to let you know about the second National Summit on Rural Road Safety called Bridging the Gap. This will be held December 4th through the 6th in Savannah, Georgia. We would love to have all of you there. It is held as a roundtable type discussion with different breakout sessions, and so we would love to have a very diverse group in our audience and telling us about your needs and your solutions. This Safety Summit will be the second one, and it will be co-hosted by the National Association of County Engineers and the National Center for Rural Road Safety. As I mentioned earlier, you can find the Save the Date card and a sponsor packet in the handout section in the bottom left. If you have any questions remaining that we haven't been able to answer yet and would like to contact any of our presenters, their emails are now being shown on the screen. And again, I do really want to thank Hillary, Scott, Karen, Donna, for taking the time today to talk to you guys about local safety funding. We appreciate it.